it. And it's actually marvellous to be able to work with a client over a 10-year span.
Yes.
To revisit where we started with the report from 2006 and to update it in the current climate. And I'm incredibly excited that we do have a report, which looks like this, the one you'll get the first time I've seen it today. Now, I've worked out that I'm too short to stand behind the lectern. So I'm going to experiment. Oh, it sounds a bit loud, doesn't it? Do you want to turn it down? I used to be called Megaphone Mel at one of the agencies I worked at back in the 1980s, so I do have to watch it with the volume. But if you start holding your ears, I'll know what's going on. Janet and I have never been to Cannes, and we both thought this was going to be our big opportunity. And we were invited to go to that lovely rooftop terrace, but sadly she had an immovable gig in Birmingham, and I had an immovable gig in Manchester last week. So it's nice to look at the photos. And very exciting to be here at the London launch, which of course is where the action really is as far as the IPA is concerned, and a lot of the work that we've been doing. So let's hope I'm pressing the right button. Ah, no. It's going to be one of those evenings, I think, with the tech. Sorry, let's just get that back in. There. Okay. Right. If I just press it very gingerly, that's it. There we go. Right. So we're talking about the report, and my job now is to give you an immersive experience of the main scenarios that were developed for the study, and also talk a little bit about the agency models that were developed by the IPA strategy group back in, I believe, in January, actually, which, of course, as Janet has said, have been through some iterations. It's hard to believe that, isn't it, Katie? In the short, dark days of January. And it's been a very interesting journey because it has been a developing, iterative process of lots of conversations, bringing in an ever wider group of interested parties who've really informed our thinking quite considerably. But where we started, and this is where I think Janet and I kind of come from the same place, is that the value of doing this piece of futures work and the piece of work we did 10 years ago is very much about really encouraging agencies and businesses in the marketing communication space in that wider ecosystem, which has been quite a popular word as we've gone throughout this study, to think about how you can create the future in a model, in a mode, in a fashion that really suits the capabilities and the talents and the skills that you have within your businesses, with the talent that you have, and sort of refashion the vision and the opportunities that are facing you. So a quote here from Andy Warhol. And I have to say that in my now 25 years of futures work, I think we're really seeing quite a shift in the way that people are thinking about the future and understanding what it might bring them. It's not about, really just anticipating the worst risks that might be on the horizon and trying to dodge those or avoid them, or even trying to look at what your clients your competitors might be up to and perhaps getting a bit of advantage on them. Increasingly, the really successful businesses are the ones who study the direction of change over the future years that are coming. And to do that, of course, you have to have a very thorough and forensic understanding of what's happening now and the speed of change on lots of different dimensions, and then use that to kind of create the world that they want. And of course, all the really big new tech brands that have come into the world over the past 10, 15 years were unencumbered by any legacy. They just had the vision. And for those businesses that have the legacy, increasingly, this is about encouraging you to take the opportunity to think more broadly and openly about what the future could be like, and use that as a stepping stone to be really innovative and creative. Anyway, and then we've got a fantastic panel who are going to debate the report and see what the view from the real world, as I call it, actually is in terms of some of the ideas and scenarios that we've developed. So the project process, and again, I don't need to dwell on this, but we did have multiple stages. And I think, as Janet said, probably the sort of best innovation from the report perspective this time was to really bring the marketing community into the discussion and the response to the ideas. And from the CMOs, I thought they used to be called marketing directors, but they've apparently become CMOs. I think they're the same people. Or it's Americanized perhaps, but we certainly interviewed 20 agency heads and CMOs all together as a sort of provocation to the start of the work we were doing. We then also looked at all of the Future Foundation trends and selected probably about the top 20 from the 100 or so that we work with that we felt were most relevant to the future of marketing communications, and used those to build a scenario grid. And then that was presented to the IPA strategy group, who responded to the initial scenarios with some new business models that you'll hear about in a minute. And then we started talking again to the CMO community and understanding a little bit of their responses to the scenarios that we come up with for 2025, the Adweek sessions, and then from all of that, gathering together, working collaboratively to produce a report, which, as Janet says, is published today. So we did also do a technology timeline, which has been is in the report here. I don't actually have a slide of it here, but just to say that what we decided to do on the technology front was to identify what the technological interface would be between consumers and brands and the media in 2025, really putting our best bet as to how things would shape up over the next 10 years. And present that as a given, rather than saying the future's driven by technology. The technology, of course, is going to be an ever more ubiquitous, more rapidly interactive and important facilitator of every interaction that we have, both amongst ourselves as consumers, as people, but also with brands, businesses and the media. So we have kind of put technology to one side, just to say that in that vision of technology, a couple of the highlights would be that by 2020, we're suggesting that nearly 50% of the population will have some kind of wearable technology that will enable ever more rapid assessing of body signs, interaction, or whatever it might be. And also, by that same time, we think that the importance of visual communication will have overtaken words and text-based communication in the interactive space. So even more of what we've seen already with WhatsApp, with Snapchat, with YouTube, with the video, that increasingly the way that we're actually going to encapsulate emotions and important attributes that we want to communicate and experiences will be through a visual medium. And of course, for all of us, well, actually, I'm talking about myself here, us older people who went to university and wrote long dissertations. I know you all went to university. Actually, you probably all wrote dissertations. Who didn't write a dissertation? Everybody write a dissertation of 10,000 plus words? Yeah, there's quite a few of us, which just seems like the weirdest sort of preparation for a world in which, you know, what you have to do is get your 114 characters or whatever it is. But we've all done it, and the world is going in a very different direction. So really understanding what that means at the interface and capitalising on that is an important part of that technology question. So technology is there. We don't have to worry about that. We just assume that it's working seamlessly, interactively for the majority of the population, and indeed all brands and businesses that want to communicate with their customers. So then that sort of freed us up to really look at what the underlying drivers of the future shape of marketing and consumer engagement were going to be. And we came up with these two axes. And on the north-south pole, just thinking about the brand, we separated out brands focusing on emotional engagement with their consumers and their audiences versus brands focusing on functional engagement. Now, of course, in the real world, when you come to look at scenarios, it's not an either-or situation. But what we're trying to do with any piece of scenario work is pull the poles apart to really create contrasting and distinct narratives about what the underlying shape of the drivers that are making our future world actually look like. So these are two parallel tracks, but they're pulling in different directions. And what was very interesting about the functional engagement axis is that was incredibly strongly informed by our marketing interviews. That there are a lot of big brand owners out there saying, actually, if we're not getting the basics right, the whole emotional journey and story just isn't going to work. We have to, you know, there were people from the telecom sector, people from the banking sector saying that, yes, in that pendulum swing, and that's the other great thing about marketing, is that there are fads and fashions just as there are in any part of business, that you know, we're almost swinging back to the 4 Ps, the Kotler 4 Ps, having sort of gone in other directions, that there is a new emphasis on that being very important as a sort of kick-off point. So that was the north-south axis, and then contrasting that on the east-west was what's going on with the consumer, with the purchaser of the future. And so we had on your left over there the idea that there is perhaps a consumer that is prepared to have brands provide them with an interface with the world, with the products and services they want to buy, with the communications that they participate in, so that the brand is an enabler or a curator. They're prepared to cede some of their sort of control and authority to have an edited choice provided to them by brands. And those brands could be Apple and Google or Unilever or whomever it might be, but the brand becomes a very significant interface. And over here on your right, the sort of idea, again, not a new one, and this is always a great thing, if you start thinking about the long-term underlying drivers, actually they don't come out of nowhere and sort of disappear into the distance. They are, you know, really what marketing has been about for a long time. That debate about the customer being king or queen is something we've certainly been talking about for a couple of decades, but sort of, you know, we're actually seeing a kind of empowered consumer that is now even more facilitated by the technology. And that's what that access is about, a consumer who wants to put it together for themselves. We've taken this on a bit at that conference that Janet was talking about at the Future Foundation. So we're now, rather to try and bring these consumer types to life a little bit, we're now talking about the savvy receiver, who is a brand sort of follower, if you like, or person who's prepared to take brand edited choice, but not in a ill-informed, unconsidered way. They are savvy, but they're able to receive and choose to receive. And over here, the selective resistor, which also highlights the fact that people will behave quite differently in different markets, dependent where their interests lie, where their passions lie, as to whether they do want to put it together or they want to have other people help them make those choices. And at our conference, we took a sort of a rain check with the audience and said at the beginning of the day, you know, where's the future lie? Or where do you think consumers are today? And there was 70% of our audience were over there with the savvy receiver. And I think the most of the discussion is actually the direction of change is over here to the selective resistor. I think by the end of the day, we'd managed to persuade a few of them that that was the direction that things are really going in. And that would certainly be something that we're watching. So that was the grid, that was the scenario sort of basis, a framework that we built on. And then we basically described what the world would be like within those grids and provided them with names. You always have to have a kind of catchy name just to bring it to life, it's part of the narrative. And top left was this brand focusing on emotional engagement, consumer buying into that brand me-cue. Clever little elision there of EQ and brand. Yeah, got it. Yeah. And basically, this is the idea of the brand as a lifestyle coach. This is kind of where Nike is going. This is a brand sort of, you know, loving you, helping you, supporting you, be the best you could possibly be. Obviously, that's an area that I think a lot of existing brands and agencies will probably feel quite comfortable in. Top right, me and the brand next door. This was the idea of the brand really supporting the consumer whose ego wants to be center stage. So it's the brand as a platform for the consumer. Down here, bottom right, you've got eye control, which is where the challenging selective resistors reside, wanting nothing more than a functional delivery from the products and services they buy. Eye control. Actually, it's a bit of a clue. It's the only one that hasn't got brand in its title. That's a very difficult quadrant to be in. We had a lot of debates about this. You know, the fact that kids are learning to code at school, and we're all seeing a new generation coming through who really do know how to put technology together in new and different ways. And bottom left, Best Buy brands, as we called them, who are really brands who are very focused on functional delivery, but also working with consumers who are prepared to cede some of that control and responsibility. And the way that we've brought them to life for 2025, so that was our starting point, was to envisage how 4 different brands would respond to each of these scenario grids going forward. So very quickly, brand me-cue Luckily, we had a great example from British Airways here. In those cyan banners, those are Future Foundation trends that fed into this particular scenario. And what that tells you is that these are building on trends that are observable today. They may not be mainstream, but they're already happening. So that the scenarios, if you like, are sort of taking that and accentuating that version of how the present is reality. And then the others are just kind of key catchwords to describe what this future is going to be like. So this is British Airways, who last year tested a happiness blanket. I don't know if anybody was lucky enough to be covered with a biometric sensing happiness blanket on a British Airways flight. Obviously, this was an experiment which was giving signals off to the cabin crew about how the passenger, how warm they were, how rapid their heartbeat was, the sort of general biometric signs of their state of being. So we're sort of just building on that idea and say, well, where would that go in the future? I don't know why this clicking noise is happening. Is it something I'm doing? No? Okay, jolly good. And so what we've done is we've projected that into the future, 10 years, and saying, well, how will we take this forward? And British Airways is just the example here, but we'll be tailoring treats to personal tastes. And in this instance, it's the idea of the 3D printed pillow, so that you no longer have to go to WH Smith and buy one of those horrible sort of things that keeps your neck, more or less upright with a bit of polystyrene around. You actually have a pillow that's printed to your own specifications that might even have, triggers and smells and things that you particularly like. And it's just part of that idea of this sort of complete, unforgettable service being wrapped in the love of the brand. It's very happy, very sort of encompassing vision of the future. So that's brand MeQ. If you just take in your head the idea of a personalised printed pillow, then that's what we're heading for. Me and the brand next door, we decided to, actually both of these are clients and indeed the next one. This is the current O2 advertising. We know the future of O2 is a little uncertain in the sort of takeover stakes and the rest, but just building on what they're doing already, and again, the trends that are feeding into this, the performative perfection, the idea that we live and create our sort of increasingly our identity through the networks and the way we communicate through those. And taking that forward into a new iteration is really providing customers of O2 in this 10-year future with platforms that they can basically easily tap into. I mean, obviously using some of today's platforms so you can recognize the idea, but it really is about supporting you, the consumer, as a star, to advertise your every move, become the constant radiator of content and engagement with your network. So it's really about making it as easy as possible for everybody to be the vlogger, the tweeter, the star of their own networks. And that's me and the brand next door, kind of the brand as a friend, as a supporter, helping you achieve what you want to achieve. And it was quite interesting because I did this presentation to Unilever, sort of one of their lunchtime training sessions, and the people from Marmite said, that's what we are. We're me and the brand next door. We're trying to kind of get our supporters, because you've got the 50-50 thing, the people who like Marmite, who want to talk about it, give them the platform to do that and share it with other people. Eye control, this was the most difficult one in some ways, but we took this Makeup Genius app, which again is another client of ours, L'Oreal, which enables you to completely perfect your look before you buy. So it's already moving to that idea of the consumer putting things together in a sort of practice way, almost like a toolbox. It's the brand as a toolbox for you. But saying, well, actually, in the future, we're not going to just want to buy into one brand or another. We're going to want a whole package of tools. So here, the future idea is to bring different brands together. So even the biggest brands are going to have to partner with others to actually create sort of total environment in which the consumer, the customer, can put her own look together. So we've just envisaged this as if, again, all of this is predicated, and we haven't taken bets on who's still going to be around in 10 years' time, but working with Topshop and using Pinterest so that every sort of component is at the control of the consumer. And when it comes to having made a purchase or got engaged, there's an auction going on here, but they've saved money, they've been awarded loyalty points, they can see the immediate impact of what their decision is. So very much a consumer in control, measuring, monitoring, choosing, putting things together. And the last one, which is the Best Buy brand, so far bottom left-hand quadrant, this is about the sort of seamless solution. And here we have picked on Alibaba, which is already the largest online retailer in the world, coming out of China and coming rapidly towards us as we speak. So this is very much about being able to get hold of those products and services, the best quality, the best price, completely transparently, and knowing that you've got the best in the most efficient way possible. And what's so interesting about Alibaba is that they're already, they've done a deal with Lending Club in America. You probably know this, but it enables American businesses who want to access goods and goods from China to borrow up to £300,000, so they can then distribute using the Alibaba platform. So this sort of idea that there's another route through to the consumer, and of course Amazon, I think, are already a long way there with their seamless service and one-click ordering. So that in the future, we envisage this Alibaba network, if you like, to provide all of the back office so that manufacturers and people providing services and wanting to distribute goods can really focus on the quality of the products and services, and then Alibaba just becomes the means by which that gets distributed to the widest possible target audiences. So those were the 4 scenarios that we came up with the well, amongst ourselves, but also in discussion with these various brands. So we've had quite a lot of fun sort of trying to decide where brands of today might actually fit. And you can disagree with these. It's looking a bit busy now, actually. They keep getting more crammed in there. But, you know, it's quite interesting to think about Nespresso, which is a seamless solution for all your coffee needs kind of thing in that sector there. Alibaba, very interesting to think that WPP are investing in My Supermarket. So that kind of tells you that somebody's putting a few, you know, spondulics behind that bet as a future development. And then up on the top left already, we've talked about British Airways, but Nike, yes, in the business-to-business space, that idea of, you know, sort of seamless, caring and supportive service. And over on the sort of friends side, obviously Coca-Cola has very much gone down that route. And we had some really interesting discussions, didn't we, Janet, with Microsoft and Google on the platform, because Microsoft said, actually, yeah, we want to be an eye-control brand. We used to be over there. We used to be in a walled garden. We wanted to control our consumers. But actually now we want to facilitate people doing it for themselves. And we do a bit of me and the brand next door because we sponsor students on campus to talk about Microsoft, and we sponsor software developers. So they're very much moving in that direction. Google, of course, said, well, we want to be in every quadrant helping everybody everywhere. So we couldn't really argue with that one. And Unilever, very interestingly, said, actually, we don't really think eye control works for us because people just don't get engaged enough with our products and services. But we like the other quadrants because we want to have a bit of those allied to the marketing of all our brands. So, you know, talkability, relevance, ease of access, and authenticity, I think, were some of the things that they're now talking about. So, but the most common axis we had, I think, Barclays said, Jaguar said, we want actually to be a combination of top left, which is brand MeQ, but also we want to offer eye control. We've got, as far as Barclays are concerned, we've got to get the basics right, but we want to build the emotion. For Jaguar, actually, you know, we've got the emotion, but we increasingly understand that we need to tailor the experience to the individual. So they've now got a 50 million lab going at Warwick University, where it's all about how the customer, the new customer, can shape every aspect of the inside of the car. And again, when you sort of start thinking about driverless cars and things, I suppose there's going to be even more need to differentiate a real car from a Google-controlled car. And yeah, we had some really interesting discussions, and we've continued to have those in different forms and formats. And the way that we've been talking about what this means for brands is under these 4 headings, really. And again, we sort of did this to a degree with the CMO benchmarking network, and as it rolls off the tongue, that one. But looking at how it impacts on brand communications, on customer experience, on innovation, and on talent. And in a way, each of these scenarios kind of gives you clues to how you might address these different questions. So again, emphasizing it's not either or, you could learn something from all of the scenarios. But the sort of discussion that seems to work with the brands that we've been dealing with is really for them trying to find their center of gravity within all of this and aligning their sort of strategy within that with their strengths and weaknesses. Some people, of course, can be everywhere, but most brands want to be somewhere within that grid, and perhaps it could be 2 or 3. Okay, so that was the sort of the brand bit, if you like. And you'll find in the report, we've come up with lots of sort of handy lists of, 5 things it means for marketers, 3 things it means for agencies, 10 things it means for us all. And actually, one of the interesting things it means for everybody, and this was a debate we had with Samsung, interestingly, at the workshop, is they said, well, why worry about having different scenarios? Isn't it all going to be about personalization? Isn't the future of marketing just that it's one-to-one, in that I can tailor everything to every single need? So that led to quite an interesting discussion about what a brand's going to be in the future. But we see personalization being part of all of those, not an answer to marketing. It's a way of really engaging the consumer at that sort of point of delivery. But for most brands, there's still a big story. There's a hero story to be told. There's a sort of, a wider canvas to be painted before you get to the one-to-one. But anyway, still open to debate. And then we had this session here, as I said, back in January, when we presented the initial scenarios to the strategy group. And again, we debated that further at Adweek, as Janet said, and we looked at what had come out of the scenarios from both on the sort of marketing side and the agency side under these different headings. And again, there's a lot more about this in the report. But just to give you a view of how the groups, we basically each, there were teams assigned to the different scenarios, have come up with 4 different new marketing communication models. And we had a bit of a debate about whether they're agencies or just marketing communications businesses. Will the word agency mean the same, be different? And also just thinking about different ways of remunerating talent and creativity. And I think we'll hear more about that from the panel. So we've got some slightly more fancy pictures of these. So top left is a model called Provocateur, which was essentially more like a sort of, it's a very challenging consultancy relationship between the agency and their clients. So even if you want to be a brand me-cue and have that state of sort of continual romance and warm enveloping of your customers, the challenge here was to say, well, you've got to constantly reinvent that. You've got to constantly be ahead, keep the romance alive. And that the provocateur model is sort of circular, and it's really about the agency not just doing the advertising, but actually constantly saying, how can you go further? How can you innovate? How can you use new technology to extend that relationship? So not resting on your laurels, but looking at new ways of, upping the ante and the emotional stakes. So this was again, it's sort of bringing all the different elements together, but in a constant state of reinvention. So I suppose some overlap there with management consultants, but a constant process, and that taking possibly some of the IP of the new ideas and developments was going to be part of a remuneration model there. The influence model was very much about becoming the platform that would enable brands and consumers to cozy up to each other. So it's really about being able to identify future consumer talent for brands and recruit them to the cause. So if we believe in this model of the self-promoting consumer as a sort of constant state of being, then this is really about increasingly finding the sponsored selves who don't mind being partly there to promote the brands. And of course, there are a lot of questions that raises, but there's a kind of pretty well-established talent spotting A&R type model that underpins this, that there would be some kind of commission and co-ownership between the agency and the brand, and facilitating, again, taking that idea of me and the brand next door even further. Down in iControl, we had quite a lot of fun with this idea of the incubator. And this was in the conception of the particular workshop. This is really about creating a space in which consumers, as much as agency staff, could actually experiment with new ideas and create new ways of solving problems. So the incubator is something that isn't just about the agency developing solutions and promoting them, but really bringing the consumer into the picture as well, increasingly. And of course, there are agencies already beginning to do that. And I think for me, one of the most interesting things that I hadn't really quite understood or appreciated about what's going on with brands now is that so many of the big brands that we've talked to are already developing their own external incubators and hubs. So, you know, you've got the Foundry, you've got the Mile End Project, I think Tesco's called the Rainmaker. This idea that actually the big brands are recognising that they can't move fast enough to keep up with the changing world. And the way that they're trying to do it is then to fund developments outside of a main business model, share, well, in some cases, share IP. But again, I think that's something that's really potent and powerful for the agency world to think about. And I know something that Janet's been very struck by as well. How can this industry, this sector, really capitalise on that trend? And yeah, I'm quite excited by that. I want them all to buy Future Foundation trends, as you can imagine. But how do you put that together in a real way that they feel that they've got some ownership and you can bolt it on? And we know agencies are doing that already. And in our seamless solution quadrant, we had a really interesting proposal here, which has actually taken that whole idea of seamless delivery further than I think we'd imagined. So it's not just about Amazon or Alibaba, it's also adding value to that, which is saying that there will be seamless solutions, and I think they're beginning to exist already. I mean, none of this is, you know, plucked out of thin air, but this idea of Sustain, which would be an agency stroke business that puts together a complete portfolio of client needs selected on the basis here of environmentally friendly, supporting the values of the consumer, the eco-consumer or the ethical consumer, so that they can buy from one supplier as easily as they could do from Amazon, knowing that everything they buy has some kind of environmental or ethical cost worked out in it. So again, that idea that actually, if you're going to be in this game, there is this real potential that you've got to move from just being about, you know, operational expenditure, and perhaps as businesses within the communication space putting things together in a much more sort of solid and you know, product-driven way. So making sure you've got good products. So that was the fourth of our models. That's the 4 models. And I think I'm just going to hand back to Janet, who's going to introduce our panel. Thank you very much.